I didn't find out through an email, not a notice, not a warning, not even a fine. I found out because a stranger was standing on my spot, looking at my RV like it didn't belong there. By the time I realized what was happening, the lock had already been changed, my access code didn't work, and my name had quietly disappeared from the system like I was never supposed to be there in the first place. And the craziest part? I had been there just 2 weeks ago. Same spot, same view, same routine my family and I had followed for years. Seabrook Cove wasn't just some random coastal town. It was where we went when things got heavy. Fog rolling in over the cliffs, the sound of waves hitting the rocks below, that calm you can't really explain unless you felt it. Spot 27 sat just far enough from the main road to feel private, but close enough to the bluff that you could see the ocean if you stood at the right angle. I leveled that ground myself, paid HOA fees every single year, never missed one, and somehow, it was gone. Before I get into how insane this gets, let me just say this. My name's Logan Pierce. I'm 43. I don't talk much, and I don't react fast, but I pay attention. I spent most of my career working construction strategy, which basically means I've seen every trick people use to move land, hide deals, and cut corners. So when something doesn't feel right, I don't ignore it. And trust me, this didn't just feel wrong. If you're watching this, I'm actually curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I always like seeing how far these stories reach. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA before, you already know how messy these things can get. You can like the video if you want, subscribe if you're into these kinds of stories, but honestly, just stick around, because this one gets out of hand fast. Anyway, that Friday started like any other. I had my son in the back seat, half asleep, phone slipping out of his hand. We'd been making that same drive down to Seabrook Cove for years. It was routine at this point. Grab groceries on the way, reach just before sunset, park the RV, and wake up to the sound of the ocean. Except this time, something was off the second I turned into the community. There was a gate, not just any gate, one of those tall, black steel ones with a keypad and camera mounted right above it. Clean install, recent, expensive. Seabrook Cove HOA barely fixed potholes on time, and now suddenly they're installing security systems? Didn't make sense. I slowed the truck down and rolled up to the keypad. Punched in the code I'd been using for years. Denied. I tried again. Same result. Behind me, my son leaned forward a little. "Dad, did they change the code?" "Looks like it," I said, already stepping out. At first, I thought it was just poor communication. Maybe they upgraded the system and forgot to notify everyone. Wouldn't be the first time the HOA messed something up. But then I saw the sign, mounted right next to the keypad. Private property, authorized residents only. Underneath it, a list of names. Printed, laminated, clean. I stepped closer, ran my eyes down the list once, then again, slower. Pierce wasn't there. Not even a typo, not misplaced, just gone. That's the moment something shifted, because mistakes happen, but this didn't feel like one. "Hey," I turned toward the voice. A man was walking up from inside the gate, hands in his pockets like he had nowhere else to be. Mid-40s maybe, clean clothes, expensive watch, someone comfortable. He stopped a few feet away, looked at me, then glanced at my RV. "You looking for someone?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, spot 27, that's mine." He paused for a second, then smiled. Not friendly, more like amused. "Yeah," he said, "not anymore." I didn't respond right away, just watched him. "What does that mean?" I asked. He stepped closer to the gate, resting his arm casually against it. "This section was sold," he said. "Couple weeks ago. Private deal, new ownership." I felt it in my chest before I processed it. Sold. "That's not possible," I said. He shrugged. "Apparently it is." I glanced past him, trying to see inside. And that's when I noticed something else. My RV. Still there, exactly where I left it. Except now, it looked out of place, like it didn't belong anymore. "That's my property inside," I said, my voice a little lower now. "Then you should probably talk to your HOA," he replied. "Deborah Kane signed off on everything." Of course she did. Deborah Kane, HOA president. Always smiling, always polite, always pretending like she was doing everyone a favor while quietly controlling everything behind the scenes. I had a few run-ins with her before, nothing major, just the usual HOA nonsense. Complaints about unauthorized modifications, warnings about minor things that didn't matter. But this wasn't a warning. This was something else entirely. "Open the gate," I said. The guy didn't move. "Can't do that. My RV is inside." He nodded slightly. "Yeah, I see that." For a second I considered forcing it. The gate wasn't indestructible. I could have hooked the truck up, pulled it clean off its track if I really wanted to. But I didn't, because this wasn't random. This was planned. And people like Deborah don't make moves like this unless they think they're covered. Which means there was paperwork, signatures, something they believed made this legal. I stepped back slowly. "All right," I said. The guy raised an eyebrow, like he expected more of a reaction. "That's it?" he asked. "For now." I got back in the truck, closed the door. My son looked at me, confused. "Dad, are we not staying?" I kept my eyes on the gate, on the sign, on the man who had already turned his back and started walking away like the conversation was over. "Not tonight," I said. As I pulled away, I checked the mirror one last time, and there it was, that feeling again. Not anger, not frustration, something colder, because I've seen situations like this before. Land doesn't just disappear. Access doesn't just get revoked overnight. And HOAs, no matter how corrupt, don't usually take risks this big unless they think no one's going to push back. Which means one of two things. Either they made a mistake, or they thought I wouldn't do anything about it. Either way, they were wrong. I didn't go home that night. Not right away. I drove about 10 minutes out from Seabrook Cove and pulled into a quiet overlook facing the ocean. Engine off. Windows cracked just enough to let the salt air in. My son had already fallen asleep again in the back seat like nothing had happened. I sat there in silence, replaying everything. The gate, the list, that guy's tone, and one name stuck in my head the entire time. Deborah Kane. If this was real, if they actually sold that strip of land, then there had to be a record, something official. Even corrupt people don't move property without paperwork. Not if they want it to hold up. And if there's paperwork, there's a trail. By the time I got home, it was close to midnight. I didn't even bother turning on the main lights. Just walked straight into my office, dropped my keys on the desk, and powered up my laptop. Within minutes, I was deep into Seabrook Cove's HOA portal. Same login I'd used for years. Same dashboard. Except now, something was different. My account still existed. My payment history was still there. Every fee I'd ever paid, neatly logged and time-stamped. But Spot 27? Gone. No assignment, no reference, no record that it was ever linked to me in the first place. That wasn't just suspicious, that was deliberate. Because systems don't erase partial data like that by accident. Someone had gone in and removed it. Clean. Like I was never supposed to prove I had it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. "Okay," I muttered. "So that's how you're playing it. They didn't just sell it. They tried to erase me from it." That meant two things. One, this was planned ahead of time. And two, they were counting on me not having my own records. That was their first mistake. I opened a folder on my desktop. Seabrook. Inside it were years of documents. Receipts, emails, HOA notices, even photos from past trips. I'm not obsessive, but I don't throw things away either. Especially when it comes to property. Took me less than 5 minutes to find what I was looking for. A PDF, dated 8 years back. A signed RV lot agreement, Spot 27. Signed, stamped, official. My name, clear as day, Logan Pierce. I opened it, scanned the clauses, and that's when I saw something interesting. Buried halfway through the document, a section most people would skim right past. Assigned RV lots are granted under exclusive use agreement and may not be reassigned, transferred, or sold without written consent of the assigned party. I stopped reading, read that line again, slowly. May not be reassigned or sold without written consent. I leaned forward slightly, because if that clause still held, then whatever Deborah signed off on was already in violation. But I didn't move too fast, because HOAs don't usually make mistakes this obvious, not at this level. So either they ignored the clause, or they found a way around it, and that's where things get interesting. I spent the next 2 hours digging, public records first, Seabrook Cove property filings weren't hard to access. Small town, limited digital clutter. Everything eventually ties back to county records. It took a few searches, a couple cross-references, and then I found it. A transfer, filed just 11 days ago. Parcel subdivision, recreational use zone B. That was the RV strip, including spot 27, transferred to a holding company. Name? Langford Coastal Developments LLC. I sat back again. Victor Langford. So the guy at the gate wasn't just some random contractor. He was connected, maybe even directly involved. But that still didn't answer the real question. How did they justify the sale? Because legally, they shouldn't have been able to. Unless they changed the classification. I went back to the HOA portal, started digging through archived meeting notes, minutes, votes, anything that looked out of place. Most of it was the usual garbage, complaints about noise, landscaping approvals, budget discussions, until I hit one entry from about a month ago. Emergency board session, land use reclassification. That caught my attention. I opened the document, and there it was, a summary of a closed-door meeting. No community vote, no member notification, just board signatures. Deborah Kane at the top. They had reclassified the RV lot area as non-essential recreational overflow space, which, according to their bylaws, allowed them to reallocate or liquidate it under community benefit restructuring. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was bold. They didn't remove the clause. They sidestepped it, redefined the land so the clause wouldn't apply. On paper, it looked clean, technically, but there was a problem. One they either missed or thought no one would notice. I went back to my original agreement, scrolled down further, past the main terms, all the way to the bottom, and there it was, a subsection most people wouldn't even read. Any reclassification of assigned recreational lots must include a 60-day written notice to the assigned party, along with an option for dispute prior to enforcement. I sat there for a second, then nodded slowly. No notice, I said under my breath. No dispute window, which meant one thing. They skipped the only step that made this legal, and if they skipped that, everything that came after was built on a violation. I checked my email. Nothing. Physical mail records? Nothing. No call, no message, no attempt to notify me. They didn't just bend the rules, they ignored them. And that's when the situation changed for me. Because up until that moment, this was confusion. Now, it was leverage. I closed the documents, sat back in my chair again, and just stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, thinking. Because this wasn't just about getting my spot back anymore. That would have been easy. File a complaint, lawyer up, force a reversal. But that's not what they expected. And it's definitely not what they deserved. Because Deborah didn't just take something from me. She made a move, a calculated one, with signatures, with money involved, with a developer already stepping in. Which means if this deal collapses, it doesn't just hurt the HOA, it hurts everyone connected to it. And people like Victor Langford, they don't like losing money, especially not because of someone else's mistake. I leaned forward again, opened a blank notepad, started writing. Names, dates, connections, Deborah Kane, board members, Langford Coastal Developments, timeline of events. Because if I was going to push back, I wasn't going to do it loud. I was going to do it right, slow, precise. And when it hit, it needed to hit everything at once. I glanced at the clock, 2:47 a.m. Didn't feel tired, didn't feel angry either, just focused. Because now I knew something they didn't. Their entire deal was sitting on a missing step. One clause, one violation, one gap they assumed no one would ever look for. And the best part? They already moved forward, signed everything, transferred ownership, brought in a developer, which means walking it back now wouldn't be simple. It would be expensive, messy, public. Exactly the kind of situation HOAs try to avoid. I closed the laptop slowly, and for the first time since that gate, I felt something close to calm. Because this wasn't about reacting anymore. This was about timing. And Deborah? She thought she had control. She thought she cleaned it up well enough. But she missed one thing. I don't chase problems. I build pressure. And right now, they had no idea how much of it was coming their way. I didn't rush back to Seabrook Cove the next morning. That's the thing most people get wrong. When something like this happens, the instinct is to react fast, show up angry, demand answers, make noise. That's exactly what people like Deborah Kane expect. It gives them control. It makes you emotional, predictable, easy to shut down. I didn't want answers. I already had them. What I wanted was to see how confident they really were. So I waited. 2 days. Long enough for them to settle into whatever version of reality they'd created. Long enough for them to believe the situation was handled, that the gate was up, the land was sold, and I'd either accepted it or given up. By Monday morning, I drove back into Seabrook Cove like nothing had happened. Same roads, same fog hanging low over the houses, same quiet, controlled atmosphere HO as love to maintain. But this time, I wasn't heading to spot 27. I was heading straight to the HOA office. Small building, glass front, clean landscaping that they probably find someone else to maintain. The kind of place designed to look official without actually being important. I parked, stepped out, and walked in. Inside, it was quiet. Reception desk, a couple of chairs, bulletin board with notices no one reads, and behind the desk, her, Deborah Kane. She looked exactly the same. Late 40s, perfect posture, that calm, controlled smile she always wore like it meant something. She looked up as I walked in, and for just a split second, I saw it. Recognition, followed immediately by composure. "Logan," she said, like this was a normal conversation. "I wasn't expecting you." Of course she wasn't. That was the point. "Yeah," I replied, calm. "I figured we should talk." She gestured toward the chairs. "Of course, please." I didn't sit right away, just stood there for a second, looking at her, measuring, because people like Deborah reveal more in silence than they do in conversation. And she was steady, too steady, which meant one thing: she believed she was protected. I sat down. She folded her hands neatly on the desk. "So," she said, tilting her head slightly, "what can I help you with?" Straight to it, no hesitation, no pretending she didn't know. Interesting. "My RV spot," I said, "spot 27. There it was. A pause, small, controlled, but it was there. Then the smile returned. "Ah," she said softly. "Yes, I assumed you might come by about that." Assumed, meaning she knew exactly what she did. "Then you already know why I'm here," I replied. She nodded once. "As you're aware, the board recently approved a land use adjustment for that section of the property." "Reclassification," I corrected. Her eyes flickered for just a second. Then she smiled again. "Yes, reclassification." I leaned back slightly. "And you sold it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for a folder on her desk, opened it, turned it toward me. Inside were printed documents, clean, organized, official-looking. "Transferred," she said, "in accordance with community development guidelines." I glanced down at the paperwork, didn't touch it, didn't need to. "I didn't give consent," I said. She didn't react. "Consent wasn't required under the new classification," she replied smoothly. There it was, exactly what I expected. They were leaning on the reclassification, using it as a shield. I nodded slowly. "Interesting," I said, "because my agreement says otherwise." Her smile tightened, just slightly. "Your agreement applied to the previous designation of the land," she said. "Once that changed, the terms no longer held." Confident, prepared, rehearsed, which meant she'd had this conversation in her head already, probably multiple times. I leaned forward now, not aggressive, just enough to shift the tone. "And the 60-day notice?" I asked. That did it. For the first time since I walked in, she hesitated. Barely, but enough. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," she said. I held her gaze. "Clause at the bottom of the agreement," I said. "Reclassification requires written notice to the assigned party. 60 days, plus dispute window." Silence, just for a second. Then she exhaled lightly. "Logan," she said, softer now, "I understand this is frustrating." "No notice," I interrupted, still calm, still controlled. "No email, no letter, no call." Her expression changed. Not panic, not yet. But the warmth was gone, replaced by something colder, more direct. "The board acted in the best interest of the community," she said. "There's a process," I replied, "and we followed it. Except that part." She didn't answer that. Instead, she closed the folder slowly, folded her hands again, and looked at me differently this time, like the conversation had shifted from polite to something else. "Logan," she said, her voice firmer now, "these decisions are not made lightly. The development agreement has already been finalized." I nodded. "I saw that. Then you understand that reversing it is not a simple matter." "I do." "Good," she said, leaning back slightly. "Then I trust you'll approach this reasonably." There it was. Not a threat, not exactly, but close enough. I sat there for a second. Then I stood up. And that's what caught her off guard, because she expected more, an argument, a demand, something emotional she could push against. Instead, I just nodded. "All right," I said. She blinked. "That's it?" she asked. "For now." I turned toward the door. "Logan!" she called after me. I stopped, didn't turn around yet. "I do hope you understand," she said, "that escalating this unnecessarily could complicate things further." Now I turned, looked at her, really looked this time, at the confidence, the control, the assumption that she was still one step ahead, and I almost respected it, almost. "Deborah," I said calmly, "you already complicated it." Her expression didn't change, but I could see it, that small shift, that moment where she realized I wasn't bluffing. I walked out without another word, back into the coastal air, same fog, same quiet streets, but everything felt different now, because this wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a position. She had hers, I had mine, and somewhere in the middle was a deal built on a missing step. I got back in my truck, sat there for a moment, then glanced toward the direction of spot 27. Didn't go there, didn't need to, not yet, because walking in angry wouldn't change anything, and taking it back the obvious way would only fix the surface. That's not what I wanted. I started the engine, pulled out slowly, already thinking 3 steps ahead, because Deborah made one critical mistake in that office. She didn't deny the notice, she avoided it, and that tells you everything. People who are covered, they don't dodge specifics, they shut them down, clean, confident, final. She didn't do that, which means she knows, and if she knows, then she also knows what happens if this gets pushed outside that office, outside the HOA, into places where documentation matters more than authority. I drove past the outer road, heading toward the highway, and for a second, I caught a glimpse of the gated section again. Black steel, closed tight, looking secure, permanent, like it wasn't going anywhere. But I've worked construction long enough to know anything built fast can come down even faster. You just need the right pressure points. And now, I knew exactly where to start, because this wasn't about getting access back. Not anymore. This was about making sure that every single person involved in that deal felt exactly how unstable it really was. And the best way to do that wasn't confrontation. It was exposure, but not all at once, not loud, not messy, slow, precise, layer by layer, until the whole thing starts to crack on its own. And when it does, there won't be anything Deborah can do to hold it together. I didn't go back to the RV spot after that meeting, didn't drive past it, didn't try the gate again, didn't give Deborah the satisfaction of thinking I was circling the problem like everyone else would, because by that point, I wasn't trying to get in. I was trying to understand exactly how far this thing went, and more importantly, how fragile it actually was. Most people think legal loopholes are complicated. They're not. They're usually small, boring, buried in language no one reads until it's too late. And the one Deborah missed? It wasn't even hidden that well. It was just inconvenient. That same night, I sat back down in my office and pulled every document I had connected to Seabrook Cove. Not just my RV agreement, everything. HOA bylaws, amendment records, archive notices, even old email chains going back years. If they reclassified that land, there had to be a trail leading up to it. Votes, amendments, approvals. You don't just wake up one morning and decide to redefine property without setting the groundwork first. At least, you're not supposed to. About an hour into digging, I found something interesting. An amendment proposal from 6 months ago. Title was generic, almost forgettable. Community Resource Optimization Update. That alone was a red flag. Anytime something sounds that vague, It usually means someone doesn't want people paying attention. I opened it, started reading. Most of it was filler, language about improving shared spaces, maximizing unused land, increasing long-term value for residents. Standard HOA pitch. But halfway through, there was a section that stood out. It referenced non-essential recreational allocations. That included overflow parking areas, temporary use lots, and anything not classified as permanent residential infrastructure, which is exactly how they justified targeting the RV strip. But here's where they got sloppy. At the bottom of that amendment, there was a condition, small, easy to miss. Any existing exclusive use agreements tied to reclassified spaces will remain protected under original assignment terms unless explicitly renegotiated with the assigned party. I read that line twice, then a third time, and just sat there for a second. Because that wasn't a gray area. That was direct, clear, and completely against what they had just done. They didn't renegotiate anything with me, didn't notify me, didn't even acknowledge that the agreement existed. They just removed it from the system and moved forward like it didn't apply anymore. Which means they didn't just skip a step. They violated their own amendment. I leaned back slowly, letting that sink in. Because now, this wasn't just about one clause in my contract. This was about internal contradiction. They created a rule, and then ignored it when it became inconvenient. That's not something you fix quietly. That's something that spreads. I opened a new document and started outlining everything. Timeline first. 6 months ago, amendment proposed. 5 months ago, amendment approved. 1 month ago, emergency reclassification meeting. 11 days ago, land transferred to Langford's company. No notice, no renegotiation, no consent. I sat there staring at the sequence. Everything lined up too cleanly, too fast, like they rushed the final step, which meant something pushed them, or someone. Victor Langford. He didn't just randomly appear. Developers like that don't wait around for opportunities. They create them, which means that deal with Deborah probably started long before the paperwork showed up. And if that's true, then the reclassification wasn't about community benefit. It was about making the land sellable. That changed the angle completely. Because now, you're not just looking at an HOA overstepping. You're looking at coordination, private benefit disguised as public decision-making. And that's where things stop being small. I checked the amendment voting record. Board members only. No community input. All signatures present. Deborah Kane at the top. Of course. Then I noticed something else. One name at the bottom had a timestamp different from the rest. Late approval. Added after the meeting. Which meant the vote wasn't even clean. They patched it together afterward. I smiled slightly. Messy, I muttered. And messy is good, because messy leaves openings. I closed the HOA files and pulled up the county property records again. This time, I wasn't just looking at the transfer. I was looking at the structure behind it. Langford Coastal Developments, LLC. On paper, it looked like a standard holding company, but those are rarely standalone. They connect. Subsidiaries, parent companies, investment groups. I followed the chain, one layer deeper, then another, until I hit something familiar. A larger development group tied to multiple coastal projects up and down Oregon. Resorts, short-term rentals, high-end vacation properties. Now it made sense. They weren't buying RV spots. They were buying location. And Seabrook Cove? Perfect candidate. Quiet town. Strong tourism. Underdeveloped land controlled by an HOA that clearly didn't mind bending rules. That's not coincidence. That's strategy. I leaned forward again, because now I wasn't just looking at what they did. I was looking at why, and more importantly, what they planned to do next. If Langford intended to develop that strip, he wasn't going to leave it as RV parking. Too low value, too limited. He'd convert it, upgrade it, turn it into something that generates constant income. Which means whatever deal he made with Deborah, it wasn't small. And if that deal gets disrupted, it doesn't just inconvenience them, it costs them a lot. I sat back again, connecting everything. Deborah thought she was in control. She thought she had the paperwork covered. But she didn't account for someone actually reading it, line by line, clause by clause, because the loophole she relied on was built on ignoring a condition that still held. And the moment that condition gets pulled into the light, everything tied to it becomes unstable. The reclassification, the transfer, the development plan, all of it. I closed my laptop slowly, not rushed, not stressed, just certain. Because now I had something solid. Not just suspicion, not just frustration, evidence. And evidence doesn't need volume, it just needs placement. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the street. Quiet, normal, like nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, everything had shifted. Because now, this wasn't about proving they were wrong. That part was already clear. This was about deciding when to show it, and who to show it to first. Because timing matters more than truth in situations like this. Reveal it too early, they adjust. Reveal it too late, damage is already done. But hit it right in the middle, when they've already committed, already invested, already moved forward thinking they're safe. That's when it breaks things. I checked the time. Late again. Didn't matter, because I wasn't tired. I was focused. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building something they wouldn't see coming. Because Deborah thought she took my spot, thought she erased my access, thought she closed the door on this. But what she actually did was give me a reason to look deeper. And once you do that, you don't just find the problem, you find everything connected to it. And right now, there was a lot more connected than she realized. By the time I finished mapping everything out, one thing was clear. This wasn't just an HOA overstepping. This was a transaction, and not a small one. You don't bring in someone like Victor Langford for a minor land shuffle. You bring him in when there's money to be made, real money. The kind that justifies cutting corners, skipping notices, and pretending clauses don't exist. Which meant Deborah didn't just act alone. She aligned herself with someone who had a plan. And if I wanted to break this properly, I needed to understand that plan better than they did. So instead of going back to the HOA, I went the other direction. Developers leave trails, not the obvious kind. Those are always clean. But if you know where to look, you can see patterns. Previous projects, investment timing, zoning requests, permit filings. It's all there if you connect it right. Victor Langford wasn't hard to track. He wasn't hiding. In fact, people like him usually want to be seen, just not too closely. I pulled up his past developments, coastal properties mostly, Oregon, Washington, a few down in Northern California. All of them followed a similar pattern. Acquire undervalued land, reclassify usage, upgrade infrastructure, convert into high-margin short-term rentals, then scale. Different locations, same formula. Which made one thing obvious. He didn't buy that RV strip to leave it as it was. He bought it because it could become something else, something more profitable. I leaned back, thinking through it. Seabrook Cove already had the demand. Tourism was steady. The location was solid. What it didn't have was optimized space. And that RV section? Perfect opportunity. Small footprint. High turnover potential. Minimal long-term commitment. Not RVs. Something better. Something like tiny homes. I sat there for a second, then nodded slowly. Of course, I muttered. That's exactly what he was planning. Not a guess. A pattern, which meant if everything went through cleanly, that strip of land wouldn't just be gone. It would be generating money. A lot of it. Every night, every booking, every season. And none of it would involve me. That part didn't bother me. What bothered me was how they got there. Because they didn't negotiate, didn't offer, didn't even try to do it right. They removed me, quietly. Like I wouldn't notice, like I didn't matter. That's where they got it wrong. I leaned forward again and opened a new tab. If Langford was moving this fast, there had to be early-stage filings somewhere. Zoning requests, preliminary permits, even informal submissions. Took some digging, but eventually I found something. A planning inquiry, filed just a few days after the land transfer. No official build request yet, but enough to outline intent. Short-term recreational housing units. That was the phrase. Careful wording. Nothing too specific, but clear enough. He was testing the waters, seeing how far he could push it before making it official. I stared at the screen for a second, then closed it, because at that point, I didn't need more confirmation. I needed leverage, and I already had it. They violated the agreement, skipped notice, ignored renegotiation, and built a deal on top of it, which means if I step in the right way, at the right time, that entire structure collapses, not just legally, financially. And that's when something clicked. Because up until now, I'd been thinking about this like a correction, expose the issue, force a reversal, get my spot back. But that's not equal. That's not even close. They didn't just take something, they tried to erase it. So getting it back was the minimum, not the outcome. The outcome needed to be bigger, something that didn't just fix the situation, but flipped it completely. I stood up, walked over to the whiteboard on the side of my office, and started writing. Land value, tourism flow, unit density, nightly rates. Because if Langford saw potential there, then so did I. And the difference between us? He needed control of the land to execute. I just needed access, legal access, which, based on everything I'd found, I still had. They removed it on paper, but not properly, not clean. Which means the original assignment still holds. And if it still holds, then I'm not locked out. I'm being blocked. There's a difference, a big one. I stepped back, looking at the board, and that's when the idea fully formed. Not just taking it back, using it, the same way he planned to, but better. Because I wasn't guessing. I knew exactly what made that location valuable. I'd been using it for years. I knew the traffic patterns, the views, the quiet spots people didn't even realize were there. Langford saw numbers, I saw function. And if I could secure that legally, then develop it first, everything changes. Because then it's not just a dispute, it's a conflict of interest, an active project, revenue, occupancy, which makes shutting it down a lot harder. I walked back to my desk and sat down again, opened my contacts, scrolled for a moment, then stopped on a name I hadn't used in a while. Caleb Foster. We'd worked together years back on a coastal project. Not a developer, something better. An investor, quiet, selective. The kind of person who doesn't jump into things unless the numbers and the structure make sense. I stared at the name for a second, then picked up my phone. Didn't call, not yet. Because this wasn't a casual conversation. This needed to be precise, clear. No emotion, just facts. Opportunity, risk, return. I opened a new document and started outlining everything. Current situation, legal gaps, development potential, projected returns based on conservative occupancy. Nothing exaggerated, nothing unrealistic, just clean numbers. Because if Caleb was going to listen, it had to make sense immediately. And it did. The more I broke it down, the clearer it became. That strip of land, even at a small scale, could outperform most short-term rental setups in the area, especially if done right. Mixed unit styles, efficient spacing, simple design, high turnover, low maintenance. I finished the outline, read through it once, then saved it. And finally, I made the call. It rang twice, then 3 times. Logan. Caleb's voice came through, calm as ever. Didn't expect to hear from you. Yeah, I said. I've got something you might want to look at. Pause. What kind of something? I leaned back in my chair. Coastal property, I said. Undervalued, already in transition, legal leverage in place. Another pause, longer this time. You have my attention, he said. Good, I replied, because the window on this isn't going to stay open for long. And that was the truth, because Deborah and Langford, they thought they were ahead. They thought the deal was already done. But what they didn't realize was that they didn't close it clean. They rushed it, skipped steps, left gaps. And those gaps, they weren't just weaknesses. They were entry points. And now, I wasn't just looking to push back. I was looking to step in. The morning I decided to move forward, Seabrook Cove looked like any other sleepy coastal town. Fog hung low over the streets, seagulls cried somewhere in the distance, and tourists were just starting to trickle into the town's cafes and boutiques. Perfect cover. I didn't rush straight to spot 27, not yet. First, I needed a plan, a quiet operation that no one could trace. If Deborah or her board noticed me before I was ready, they'd tighten security, shut down access, and maybe even involve Langford sooner. That would ruin everything. I pulled up my blueprints, sketches, and notes from the night before. Caleb was on board. He trusted the numbers I sent him, and that was all I needed to move fast. The key was simplicity. I wasn't trying to build a luxury resort overnight. I didn't need permits for small-scale temporary structures. I needed proof. Proof that I could use the land legally, exploit the loophole, and start earning occupancy, all while the HOA scrambled to react. I loaded my truck with materials, modular framing kits, basic plumbing components, solar panels, and tools. Nothing extravagant. No one would expect construction to happen in a weekend, especially not in a place where they thought everything was already sold. Arriving at Spot 27 felt surreal. The black steel gate still stood tall, and the fog made it look like a fortress. I parked a few blocks away and walked in quietly. One glance confirmed that nothing had changed. Bare lot, freshly graded dirt, remnants of old RV tracks. Perfect, untouched, waiting. I started with small markers, stakes to outline foundations, modular kits ready to be set inside them. As I worked, I realized something. Every small action here was a message. Not loud, not aggressive, but visible to anyone watching from afar. Deborah's HOA loved surveillance. Cameras dotted corners of the property. I used that to my advantage. By noon, I had the outlines complete, ready to assemble the first 2 tiny units. Each one was compact but efficient. Solar power, water hookups, insulated walls, and basic furniture. Caleb had ensured financing for high-quality yet inexpensive materials, so I wasn't scrimping, but I wasn't leaving evidence that screamed luxury development. Then came the fun part. By early afternoon, I had a structure partially assembled, 1 unit framed and covered, ready for interior finishing. The HOA cameras must have noticed. By the time I finished the first module, I spotted a black SUV parked at the edge of the street, 2 board members inside, probably Deborah's puppets. They looked around, confused. Good, exactly how I wanted it. I didn't confront them. I didn't say a word. I just smiled to myself. Let them wonder, let them worry, because that uncertainty would grow. And as we all know, uncertainty is contagious in HOA politics. By evening, 2 complete tiny units stood at Spot 27, functional and rentable. I snapped a few photos, logged the work in a digital diary, and uploaded a preliminary rental ad under a separate LLC I'd set up months ago. Nothing flashy, just a simple listing. Seabrook Cove Coastal Tiny Home. Quiet, scenic, legal stay. Within hours, inquiries started coming in. I didn't have to push it. The location sold itself. Tourists trusted the website. I'd used professional photography and realistic rates. Already, money started flowing. Legal money, directly from occupancy, not from handshakes or secrets. Meanwhile, the real chaos was happening back at the HOA. Deborah's phone never stopped ringing. Board members were panicked, unsure how this happened. Emails flooded in, community complaints, neighborhood tips, and a few anonymous notes referencing construction at Spot 27. Every time they checked their records, they realized the spot hadn't been transferred to my LLC. My original assignment still stood, and my small-scale setup didn't violate any local codes. Deborah finally showed up in person, flanked by her 2 bored cronies. I didn't meet her at the gate. I waited in plain sight, just a few units inside, as she stormed in, glaring, arms crossed. What are you doing?" she demanded, voice sharp, elevated. She'd clearly prepared herself for confrontation. I smiled, calm. "Using my property." "Your property? That spot doesn't belong to you anymore," she said, stepping closer. I tilted my head, eyes on her. "Check the clause again. Section 4, subsection 12, line 3. Reclassification required 60 days notice and explicit consent for any negotiation. Didn't happen. You ignored it. And now," I gestured to the tiny units behind me, "I'm exercising what's legally mine." Her face flickered. Not anger, not confusion, surprise. That pause was all I needed. She had built this whole facade of control, and in one sentence, I dismantled it. Board members stammered, trying to find some excuse, some loophole I hadn't already documented. They couldn't. And Langford? I hadn't even involved him yet. He'd hear about this through the channels. His investment, already queued, now threatened by a small-scale but completely legal operation. His reaction would be swift, predictable, and necessary for the next step. I spent the next 2 days continuing construction. By the weekend, 4 fully functional tiny homes stood on Spot 27. Each was rented for that first weekend, booked by tourists who had no idea they were part of a legal chess match. The money? Flowing. Direct deposit. Tax records ready. Evidence in place. And Deborah Kane? She couldn't touch it. Any attempt to stop me without triggering a legal dispute would only make her look worse. Public opinion would swing immediately, neighbors siding with me because I was transparent, operating legally, and providing income. By the end of the week, I had a system. Rentals going, booking schedule optimized, occupancy high, and every step documented. Photographs, timestamps, contracts, digital logs. Every unit, every inquiry, every dollar earned. I leaned back in my office that night, watching the faint glow of the tiny units in the fog, feeling something I hadn't felt since this began: control. Not just over my property, but over the story, the narrative, over Deborah Kane, Langford, and the greedy little board members who thought they could manipulate an entire process without consequence. The first real move had been made, and if Chapter 6 had taught me anything, it was that action, precise and deliberate, beats waiting for justice every single time. The dominoes were set, the pressure applied, and now it was just a matter of watching them crack, slowly, painfully, in plain sight. By the time Monday rolled around, Seabrook Cove was buzzing, not with tourists, but with murmurs about Spot 27. Somehow, word had spread. The tiny homes were live, bookings were rolling in, and the HOA was in full-blown panic mode. I didn't need to advertise. The combination of legality, location, and curiosity had done the job for me. Deborah Kane stormed into the first tiny unit that morning, face red, arms trembling slightly with frustration. Her usual composure had cracked. The two board members trailing her were equally unsettled, muttering about unauthorized construction and legal breaches. They were desperate for someone to blame. I greeted her calmly, as if nothing was happening. "Good morning," I said, walking past her without a pause, glancing at the clean interiors, solar panels, and neatly arranged furniture. "I trust you've seen everything." She stopped mid-step. This isn't legal," she shouted. "You can't just—" I cut her off. "Actually, Deborah, I can. You forgot a few key details when you executed your little scheme." Her face paled slightly as she realized I wasn't bluffing. Every document, every clause, every notice she had ignored was logged, dated, and cross-referenced. I hadn't just found the loophole. I had mapped every potential argument they could throw at me and neutralized it before it ever reached the court. "Notice? Consent?" she snapped, voice rising. "You think this is just paperwork?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I think it's the law. And the law doesn't care about your position, your title, or your plans. You ignored it, you violated it, and now you have to deal with the consequences." Outside, the board members whispered among themselves, clearly realizing that their carefully orchestrated plan had gone sideways. Panic was spreading like wildfire. They were scrambling, making calls, but everything I had done was above board. There was nothing they could immediately use to stop me. Then came the financial twist. I had set up direct deposits for the tiny home bookings, and by mid-morning, the first payments had cleared. Money that should have been flowing to Langford's account, or to the HOA's development fund, was now in my legal LLC's account. Profit, evidence, proof that the project was operational and legally mine. Deborah's face turned a sickly shade of green. She had underestimated me. She hadn't just ignored the clause. She thought I would sit back, accept it, or complain quietly. But I hadn't. And now her secret transaction with Langford was exposed indirectly because I was operating openly on what was still legally my property. By the end of the morning, the board convened an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but I had my people watching. Caleb's team and I were tracking every movement: camera feeds, community chatter, online posts, emails, everything. Transparency had become our tool. Inside the meeting room, chaos erupted. Board members were pointing fingers. Deborah tried to maintain authority, but the cracks were visible. "Logan is breaking the law," she barked. "We need to issue a cease and desist." One board member, younger and less seasoned, looked skeptical. "Deborah, did we check the clause? Section 4, subsection 12? Her face went blank. Well, exactly. Even her own team questioned her. And that's when it hit me. Once internal doubt sets in, authority crumbles fast. The HOA had built its control on fear and obedience. Remove the certainty, and they were lost. Within hours, the board was scrambling to find a legal argument. Lawyers were called, but every step I had taken was documented, transparent, and airtight. Any aggressive move from them would only expose more of their underhanded dealings. And then came the humiliation. Deborah, desperate to save face, tried a last-ditch effort, offering me a rental lease on the very units I built. The same land she had secretly sold to Langford, now transformed into fully operational tiny homes. I laughed quietly when I heard. She was literally asking me to pay to use what was mine, under her supervision. The irony was so thick it could have been carved into stone. I refused, politely but firmly. Instead, I sent the full breakdown of the legal violations, financial missteps, and public documentation to the county. The county had already been suspicious of the reclassification and secret sales. Once the information landed in their hands, investigations began almost immediately. Within a week, news leaked. Deborah Kane had been arrested, not for anything dramatic, but for falsifying records and mismanagement of HOA funds. Board members who had blindly followed her faced audits, and some were forced to resign. Public sentiment swung massively in my favor. Everyone knew Spot 27 was now legally mine, operated responsibly, and generating revenue. The final piece of satisfaction? Deborah herself had no choice but to become a renter if she wanted to enjoy the space she thought she had taken from me. Tiny home number 3 had her name on the booking schedule, paid in full by her own bank account. Humiliation complete. Sitting back on the balcony of my temporary office overlooking the units, I let it all sink in. The revenge was complete. Not violent, not dramatic, but perfect. I hadn't just reclaimed my property. I had dismantled the system that tried to take it, exposed the corruption, profited legally, and made the mastermind herself experience the consequences firsthand. Seabrook Cove would remember this for a long time, and so would I. By the time the fog rolled over Seabrook Cove that week, the town had started whispering about Spot 27. What started as a quiet little RV parking dispute had exploded into something nobody, including the HOA or Victor Langford, had expected. I watched it unfold from the small balcony I'd set up above the units, coffee in hand, calm, collected, and completely in control. The tiny homes were fully operational, fully booked, and fully legal. Each unit had tenants arriving and leaving on schedule, all payments going directly into the LLC I had registered months ago. Every transaction was traceable, transparent, and untouchable by Deborah, the board, or Langford. Their underhanded plan to sell and reclassify the land had given me a golden opportunity. They had rushed, skipped steps, and underestimated me. Classic rookie mistake. Langford finally called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Logan, we need to talk," he said, his voice sharp but cautious. "I didn't expect you to be operational so fast." "The HOA, they said—" "I know exactly what the HOA said, Victor," I interrupted, calmly but firmly. "And they were wrong, completely. Every clause they ignored, every step they skipped, you'll find logged, dated, and fully compliant with the law. You invested in what you thought was a clean transfer, but it wasn't, and now it's active under my control." A long pause followed. I could hear him weighing his options. Then, finally, You're serious." "I've been serious since the day Deborah tried to erase my rights," I replied. "And right now, Spot 27 is not just a legal victory. It's operational, it's generating income, and it's not going anywhere." Victor's frustration was palpable. He had planned a lucrative development, but he had ignored the foundational legality, and that oversight was costing him both time and potential profit. I hung up, knowing the psychological advantage was mine. Langford would reassess, maybe back out, maybe negotiate, but the first move had been mine, and I had executed it perfectly. The HOA, meanwhile, was crumbling. Deborah Kane had been arrested for falsifying documents and mismanagement. The board members who had blindly followed her were forced into public resignations or under investigation. Their authority evaporated overnight. Every neighbor, every resident, even casual tourists, now viewed me as the one who had exposed the truth, reclaimed the property, and acted decisively. And the best part? Deborah herself had to become a renter if she wanted to enjoy the property she had tried to steal. She booked the very tiny home she had secretly hoped to control, paying the standard nightly rate. I even made a note to greet her politely when she arrived, just to drive the point home. The revenge was perfect, legal, complete, and satisfying. I hadn't just regained what was mine, I had turned the tables entirely. What they thought would be an easy profit and control scheme became their undoing. I had taken advantage of their mistakes, exploited the loopholes they ignored, and emerged not only unscathed, but victorious. Sitting back, I reflected on the journey. Months of research, late nights reviewing clauses, building relationships with the right investors, and strategically executing the construction. All of it had culminated in this. The HOA, the corrupt board, the overconfident Karen, they all underestimated me. And the townspeople? They had a new hero story, a quiet, calculated underdog victory that reminded them that knowledge, patience, and strategic action trumped power plays and greed every time. I leaned forward and typed a quick update for my social media and community forum. I wanted the story documented, transparent, and shared. No ambiguity, no exaggeration. Spot 27 is live, legal, and operational. Guests welcome. HOA mismanagement exposed. Lessons learned. Always read the fine print. Within hours, the post blew up. Comments poured in. People from the town, tourists, even other property owners shared their own HOA horror stories. The narrative was clear. If you understand the rules, play strategically, and act decisively, you can win against even the most entrenched power structures. I glanced at the units below. Tourists laughing, kids running between the tiny homes, sunlight breaking through the fog just enough to make everything look golden. Calm, productive, and exactly as I had planned. Reddit-style forums started picking up the story. HOA tried to steal my property, got destroyed by my loophole, was trending in a few local threads. People dissected the clause I had exploited, the speed of construction, and the ultimate humiliation of Deborah Kane. That was the kind of storytelling that resonated. Raw, real, and satisfying. I took a sip of coffee, looking out over the foggy coastal town. My plan had worked perfectly. Legal, financial, and reputational victory, all while leaving the HOA in ruins. Langford had been forced to reconsider. Deborah was paying for her mismanagement, and the community had a lesson in vigilance and justice. Finally, I drafted my last note for the day. Not a brag, not a threat, just a reflection. Knowledge is power, patience is leverage, and even the most confident tyrant falls when they ignore the rules. As I sent it, I couldn't help but smile. The game was over. Spot 27 was mine, legally and operationally. The HOA was humiliated, and the mastermind herself was finally paying the price. The tiny home resort was not just a victory, it was a statement. Seabrook Cove would never forget it, and neither would I.